This is a rebroadcast of the Cat Smith Show from 2006.
I sit today with an artist, an illustrator, a man who makes his living by drawing. He has the dream job every artistically talented teenager wants. If you read modern comic books, then you have seen his work. He illustrates Superman, Justice League, and has more than 20 book entries on Amazon.com. Please welcome our guest, Mr. Doug Mahnke.
Hello, Cat.
Doug, on the Cat Smith Show, we like to speak with people who have developed their God-given talents. You are an artist, and honestly, I can't think of a riskier way to support a family than by art, or than by artwork. Am I wrong? Are there jobs or careers for artists in this country?
Yes, there are. You are right, though. It is a risky thing for many people to undertake. The opportunities are not always present, and the talent required to execute them usually runs high. Particularly in the business that I am in, illustrating comic books, you have to have a very narrow type of talent. You have to be very fast. Everything that you do is essentially on the clock because you're trying to hit a deadline day after day after day. And you have to be good, and it's very difficult to put those two together. You can't, there are many people who are fast and not very good, and then there are equally as many people who are particularly good but not particularly fast. It's putting the two together, being self-disciplined, taking care of business on a regular daily basis, making sure you get your work done. So it's not for everybody.
Well, Doug, about you, where did you begin drawing? And when you began drawing, what did you draw?
I started as just like most kids who have an interest in a pencil. I picked it up when I was very young. My mother says I was a very typical child, a little boy that was, full of energy and very busy. But as soon as I discovered a pencil, I really enjoyed sitting down, and I would sit mesmerized with paper and pencil for hours. And she said I was in a different world. I would just sit there and draw. She said much could happen around me, and I wouldn't even notice. Well, with that kind of concentration, I really just was enjoying myself. I had a natural aptitude. My parents aren't artists themselves, but they're gifted in other ways in regarding the arts. My grandfather was a painter. My aunt, his daughter, was also was a very good artist. So it's a family trait. So I started young, very young, probably 3 years old. Just developed it from there.
Did your mom tell you what you drew as a child, what your favorite was?
Well, monsters always come to mind. As a little boy, dinosaurs. There was a lot of dinosaurs. No, actually, it was dinosaurs. No cars for me. It was dinosaur after dinosaur after dinosaur, or bugs, or things that were creepy. In fact, there was my grandmother, who I spent many hours drawing at her table. She once asked me if I'd draw her something nice. And I sat down and I drew her a page filled with ladybugs. That was the nicest thing I could think of. But I did definitely have an eye for drawing other things. In fact, when I was taken in for my pre-K screening, go and see the doctor asked, he was just trying to see if I had any kind of, how my motor skills were. And he said, "Can you draw a picture of your mother?" And so he handed me a paper and pencil, and I said, "Mom." And she looked over. I said, "Hold it." And then I proceeded to draw, as best as a little boy could, to draw a 3/4 profile. And the doctor was more than convinced that I was ready for kindergarten.
That's exciting. Did you have to learn to draw at all?
Not a great deal. I can't say it was beginning at a real early age, but my mother began finding things for me to do that were outside of school. School is fairly limiting, because you're trying to teach a bunch of kids all the same thing. And if you have a child with talent, then to keep them from being bored, you do have to pursue other opportunities. And so, yes, I would take lessons here and there. Sometimes they worked out. I would walk into a place and there would be a very good relationship between me and a teacher. The learning would begin. Some were not like that. Some people were really no better than the kind of classes that you would have in a setting with 25 kids, and that's not what we were looking for. But yeah, I would say most of the things that I did that were outside of school and that were learning specifically from a talented adult took place when I started to hit about 5th grade, 6th grade. where I had a portrait class that I engaged in that was really a class for adults, but they let me in the class, and that was a great learning experience. Then I had a teacher, her name was Joelle Waldo, and she was a very good one-on-one. Even though it was a small class, very small class environment, she gave a great deal of attention to every student. You know, the list goes on, but it's not a very long list.
That's in the grade school years. Did you do other things to develop your talent in the high school years, the college years?
I did have exposure to good people. Whenever somebody with some talent or some artistic ability came up that my parents became aware of, they tried to set me up. So yes, usually it was not necessarily in teaching me things, but in learning what art was, what it could be, trying to expand my mind. Probably the best thing that ever happened to me actually did happen in school, which was in 9th grade. And most of the children that are good at art tend to take it very personally, and I was no exception. And they often get told that they're very good, often by people who are very well-meaning, parents, grandmothers, fathers. And so they don't really get a whole lot of negative feedback, or maybe honest feedback is the right word. And I had a teacher in 9th grade, her name was Pat Wolf. She was fantastic. And I was busy doing a drawing in class, and she walked up and she told me that the legs were too short. Now immediately I took offense. I said, no, they're not, as if anything that I could possibly draw could be wrong. I just disagreed with her flat outright. She says, okay, I'll be right back. So she went and grabbed some books that had figure studies, sculpture as well, from old masters. And she said, I'll take a look. And she opened them up and she set that stuff next to mine. And that was a huge turning point in my life. In fact, probably more pivotal than any other moment in history of my personal history where art was concerned. I was able to suddenly realize that all that I had for the rest of my life ahead of me was the opportunity to learn. And I was never going to be the best that there ever was, as if that actually exists. What an artist should strive for is to always be open to improvement. They should never rest on their laurels, never look at what they do as being the definitive and the only. They should always be humble and examine what they do for what it is, something that could always be better. After that, I never took offense at anything anyone ever gave me. I always enjoyed criticism from even those unqualified to give it, because it tells me what they see and what they like as opposed to what I'm doing. That was probably the best moment in my art training, was freeing my mind so that I would know that it really didn't matter what I drew, as long as I was, as an artist, pursuing improvement. And one of the things that is a quality that every artist really should have is the ability to be self-critical. They should look at their work, be able to use that as a springboard to go on to what is next.
How did you get a dream job illustrating major names or major figures in comic books?
I'd fallen away from comics for several years. And I had gotten to a point where I was trying to find a way to make a living. I'd gotten myself educated as a machinist, was having trouble making that work. And I just happened to land a job painting T-shirts out at Six Flags Great America over Illinois. Well, through that I met my wife, who was there to do caricature. To make a long story short, she and I got married about a year after we met. And so there I was, and I'm thinking, well, you know, T-shirts does okay, but it's not something that's gonna pay all the bills. So I happened to read an article in the newspaper, and this was actually a very good time for comics. Comics were rising fast in terms of print run. People were making money hand over fist, and there was an article about comics in our local paper, and they included a commentary about a particular artist named John Byrne, who's very successful. And it also listed the salary that he was making. It's not salary really, you know, he's self-employed, but you get the idea, which I think was listed at something like $200K a year. And I'm thinking, well, I could use some of that. And so it had been a while. I had not really thought about comics, and I sat down and I created a portfolio, something out of my mind that I thought was interesting, plus several illustrations to send along with it. And I sent it out to every company that I could, that I could get the mailing address for. And this is how green I was. I really didn't know who to send it to, which would have been proper to send it to an editor. Instead, I sent it to the art director, who really has nothing to do with selecting artists. His job is just taking care of art. A company called Dark Horse Comics called me back because a particular writer, his name's John Arcudi. John Arcudi and I ended up working together for many years. Went through their files and came across my art and said, I really want this man to illustrate this next story that I'm going to do. And so they called me up. They said the work doesn't start until a particular date, which was 2 weeks before I got married. So my wife and I went through one more year of doing caricatures and T-shirts. Came back to Minnesota from Illinois. I moved in the apartment, started working, and the rest has been fairly consistent ever since then.
So once you start drawing for a particular publisher, then your work is out there, and then somebody else can give you a call too. Is that kind of how it goes?
I started with a company called Dark Horse. They're the first ones to contact me. And through working with them and the work that I had done, some of the projects ended up fairly high profile. A deal was made with a particular character that I had been associated with called The Mask. They had made a movie out of it. And from there, they decided to do a crossover with the DC character. They used to do this every once in a while. It just happens occasionally. But in this instance, I got together with, DC and Dark Horse got together, came up with a script. And when I had finished illustrating it, by the time I had finished my work, DC had actually offered me the next gig as opposed to Dark Horse. And I do remember them being Dark Horse being a little bit, not angry, but feeling that they dropped the ball there. And at that point, I never really worked for Dark Horse again. I've been with DC ever since.
Do you approach the drawing of Superman differently? In other words, are they unique characters to you, almost live? Do you think about their personalities? Do you wear a different hat? Absolutely.
They are about as different as you could possibly create two characters in a universe that are heroes. And one of the things that I, as an artist, have always aspired to do as a comic book illustrator is to create individual characters. It's very easy to fall into a mold as a comic book illustrator because you're pressed for time and drawing everybody the same. What I have tried to do is bring individual personality to every character that I draw in any comic, regardless of if it's Batman or Superman or Jimmy Olsen or Robin or even the man on the street. In fact, some of the funnest things I do are the people that will never show up in another panel again. The reaction of a character on the street as he sees something fantastic happen is an opportunity to really tell the story. But yeah, especially when you pick out Batman and Superman, they're very different.
Oh, that's great. Doug, you're a Catholic man. How do you see your talent from a Christian perspective?
Whenever you're working in a worldly medium, and that's definitely what I am, and sadly I see comics that are produced every day that are anti-Catholic, actually any institution that might hold people accountable. It is at times very difficult to work in this business. There are certain parameters that I set and I lay down when it comes to the work that I'm willing to do. There are things that I've turned down that have been offered me that would be extremely beneficial to my career, that I would make a lot of money doing, that I've refused to do. And it's never been hard for me to do it, and obviously it is done on principle. When you start to sell yourself out and you're willing to take certain steps, you've opened doors to other steps that you shouldn't be taking.
Do you have additional career goals for yourself?
Well, my goal, I've had actually one goal that has been with me since I started. And what it was to always be relevant in the business that I'm in.
Do your children show any artistic talent, and what are you doing about it?
If your child shows talent, don't have them put all of the things on random pieces of paper. I mean, as it is, even though I provide my kids with sketchbooks that are, and hardbound ones are the best because they'll hold up the best, and they still consume enormous amounts of typing paper and every other kind of paper they can get their hands on.
That's great advice for parents who have artistically talented children. Doug, what advice do you have for that illustrator who still lives in his parents' house and thinks he would like to develop his talent.
I've gone to convention after convention. I've seen many times the same people show up who really are not making any progress. What you have to do is you have to be able to set aside your personal love for your hobby. You know, you look at your hobby for what it is. It would be great for anyone to be able to say, oh, I want to work at my hobby. But just like there's guys out there who play Little League ball, you know, and they're a good ball player, but they know there comes a time when they set aside what they do because they're not going to be major league. They recognize it quick. It's pretty obvious. I can't run fast. I can't pitch well. I can't bat well. I'm okay for playing a game here, but I'm not major league material. People who are interested in comics often have a real hard time recognizing that because these characters are ones that they love. It's a personal connection. It's not just a hobby. But at the end of the day, collecting is a hobby, and admiring comic book characters is great. But it's not going to pay the bills for everybody. It's a very small business, and you can be very talented, but you might be talented in other ways. And it's a hard piece of advice to level to many, but you got to take a hard look at yourself. If when you sit down to draw, you tend to draw pictures on pieces of typing paper that shows a character from one side, and you like to design costumes, and you draw this character over and over from the same perspective, that's not comic book art. Comic book art is the ability to tell a story, and you have to tell it fast. You tell it in many panels and over 22 pages in a book a month. That's a tremendous amount of drawing. Most people can't do it. Most people that want to do it are nowhere near having the ability to do these things. No, I'm not doing that just to, you know, to toot the horn of everybody who does it. But the fact is, for example, my wife is a very good artist, but she's not a fast artist. She doesn't have the ability to just grind out imagery as fast as I do. However, she has her abilities, and she has her strengths. People have to play to their strengths and recognize what they are. And they also have to have the humility to be able to put down and say, look, this isn't what I do. I may have other gifts and other talents. And that's the first piece of advice I have. Recognize whether or not you really have the God-given talent to pursue this, because it's not for everybody. The other piece of advice is for those who really believe that they do, and as long as you've truly and honestly listened to, you know, the first piece of advice, make sure that you're a well-rounded artist. You have to make sure that all of the things that you do have relevance in your drawing. That means that you can draw cars, buildings, streets, signs. You have to do all the things that make the environment seem real. You have to understand anatomy front to back. You have to be able to turn people around. You have to be able to look at them from the top and from underneath. You have to be able to draw many things. And if you have not been concentrating on that, you need to start. And number three, within this little this little description of advice, know that the necessary discipline and speed is also not something for everybody. If you're a good artist and you can draw, but it takes you 6 days to do a page, you're going to suffer in this business. You're not going to make money. You also have to realize that you have to sit down. You can't decide to watch the television. You can't just go out to see the movies. It requires full-time attention. If you really want to do comic book art, you have to sit down and make sure that everything that you do is going to mesh with this business. You have to be disciplined. That means when you get up in the morning, you know that you're going to work. You have to be able to be fast, and you have to be multifaceted as an artist. There's lots of room to learn how to cartoon in it, but you actually have to be good, at least passable good in all the things that you see, because telling a story involves, to make a story believable, or so that you could suspend your disbelief in a comic, you have to be able to add depth to it. And the depth has to come from your knowledge and understanding of the environment that everyday people live in, not just superheroes. It's great to draw a superhero streaking across the sky, but it doesn't mean anything unless you have the ordinary guy and the ordinary woman standing next to their ordinary car and building, being fascinated by that hero. If you can do that, then you're on the right track.
Well, folks, I'm going to wrap up this show today, and I'd invite you all, if you want to see more of Doug's work, to sign on to Amazon.com and key in his name, Doug Mahnke, that's M-A-H-N-K-E, Doug Mahnke.